Welcome back to the live coverage of the Real News Network. We're in New Hampshire, in Manchester. We're waiting for results. People are out voting, and within just a matter of minutes, we'll be going live from some polling stations, talking to voters, and we'll go live to the Sanders watching party and the Clinton watching party, maybe some of the others. Please stay with us. We'll be here for into the evening a bit until results are settled. Certainly results in the Democratic Party primary might be settled rather quickly if, in fact, Bernie Sanders is as far ahead as people are saying. Results are going anywhere from a Sanders victory of 14 or 15%. We've polled polling supposed numbers as high as 30%. I think this information of 30% might be coming from the Clinton campaign, because it's now not become a war of who's going to win tonight. It's a war of who's going to exceed or not exceed expectations. So if people can get people expecting 30, 40, or 50%, then 15% is going to look like a Sanders defeat. It's kind of a nonsensical media manipulation that's going on. I think probably realistic polling numbers, from what we're gathering, and who the heck really knows, maybe 13, 14% Sanders victory, and if he does, then that would have actually exceeded expectations if it hadn't been for all the silliness that's going on. On the Republican side, Trump is, last poll we saw, somewhere around almost tied with Kasich. That's not, again, we don't know how reliable any of this is, but Kasich seems to be making a big move here. That's the gossip and the rumor. Who the heck knows if any of this is true? Maybe this is being put out by the Kasich campaign. Anyway, speaking of Donald Trump, Donald has a very serious infrastructure project proposed. It's not quite on the scale of Bernie Sanders, but you'd have to give Donald Trump some kudos that his infrastructure project is much more focused. It's much more defined. It's let's build a wall all across the Mexican-U.S. border. I don't know if you caught my interview with his immigration policy advisor. Between that interview and what Trump is saying, apparently this wall is going to be 30 to 50 feet high. I think this is going to be something like in Game of Thrones, the wall of ice for the Northern Empire, where you can keep out the zombies and whoever. Those images are sort of being evoked by this wall. I don't quite understand how they plan to deal with tunneling. So I guess they're going to do another 30 to 50 feet going straight down. And according to the Donald, the Mexican government will pay for this. He hasn't quite explained how that happens at any rate. Anyway, here to talk about immigration and the Donald's wall and so on, in the studio is Agustin Barrios-Gomez. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Augustine chaired the Interparliamentary Working Group with the U.S. House of Representatives. He's now an outgoing congressman of Mexico City or from Mexico City, or both?
Both. Actually, I represent the up until September, I represented the 10th district in Mexico City.
So an equivalent to American City Council. But
No, it's actually the federal Congress, which is why I dealt with my colleagues in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay, so a representative from Mexico City in the federal Congress. That's what I was getting at. Okay. Talk about the wall, and then we'll kind of get into a little more of the substance of this, because I can't imagine even Donald takes the wall too seriously, but that's maybe presumptuous. At any rate, what do you make of this wall, and why on earth would Mexicans pay for it?
Well, first of all, let's give this some context. So the U.S.-Mexico relationship is the most intense relationship between two large countries anywhere, right?
Intense?
It's most
what do you mean by
complete, most intense. What I mean by intense is that we've got 35 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States, out of which, by the way, 80% are U.S. citizens, such that this caricature that somehow the Mexican presence in the United States is undocumented is actually not true. 10% of the U.S. citizen population, not immigrants, not potential citizens, citizen population is of Mexican origin.
Can I stop you just for 1 sec? Because I should have done this in the introduction. When you listen to Augustine, you're going to wonder, hang on for a second, how come he sounds like this? He does not sound, there's zero Spanish accent, Mexican accent going on here. And that's because I found out Augustine went to Canada quite early, went to school in Canada.
My father became ambassador of Mexico to Canada when I was 6 years old. I actually met current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when we were both 8 years old. My father was a friend of Prime Minister Trudeau of that time, and then he was ambassador of Mexico to Switzerland, and then consul general to New York City. So I actually graduated from high school in New Hampshire. It's great to be back in New Hampshire. I went to Phillips Exeter Academy, and then I went to Georgetown University.
All right, cool. That's why his accent is as it is. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted you. So pick up.
So just to give it some context. So we've got 35 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States, 80% being U.S. citizens. At any given time, there's between 1 and 3 million Americans in Mexico, which is between 4 and 12 times more than the second most important country, which is Canada, for the U.S. presence. Just so you get an idea,
of course, as a Canadian, assuming one is proud of this, I don't know whether I am. In terms of trade, the U.S.-Canada trade is bigger than the Mexican.
It is a little bit bigger. It's about 15% bigger. We do $540 billion worth of trade with the United States, putting us in third place, sometimes second place, as a trading partner. I'll give you an example here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has 1.3 million inhabitants, which means it's a very small state, and it's about as far away from the Mexican border as you can get. And yet, we are the second most important client for New Hampshire exports. New Hampshire exports $460 million with 1.3 million inhabitants to Mexico. And when you take the...
What kind of stuff?
Basically electronics, stuff that has to do with automobile manufacturers, like specialized stuff that they do here and I actually just found out, I was looking down at the my chocolate bar, Lindt chocolate bar in Mexico City, because my daughter asked me, so what do they make in New Hampshire? I looked down at the chocolate bar that I'm having with her, and it turns out that it is manufactured in New Hampshire. Isn't that a kick? I didn't even realize that. So Swiss chocolate is manufactured in New Hampshire for the Mexican market.
Well, that's good, because none of the chocolate comes from Switzerland anyway. So.
That's right, and of course chocolate being Mexican originally, so anyway. That's a long story. But one of the things that you have to understand in this relationship, when I mean intense, I'll give you another example. So the only place outside of Washington, D.C. where every U.S. government agency is represented is Mexico City. The largest consular presence of any country anywhere is Mexico's in the United States. So you've got this massive relationship. Our border is the most legally crossed border on the planet through 55 different ports of entry, 350 million border crossings per year. So that's where you start seeing the interdependence. And of course, none of this is new. I mean, the US dollar sign was actually originally the Mexican peso sign. The New England adopted it as the sign of the currency because the currency for North America was the Mexican peso.
Sections of America were Mexico.
Of course, 30% of the US landmass, the 48 contiguous states, was a part of Mexico. So, you know, you've got a Mexican-American presence which has been here from the very beginning. And so none of this is new. It's impossible to understand U.S. history without Mexico, and it's impossible to understand Mexican history without the United States. So when you look at the world, I'm an international relations major, School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University, right? So when you look around the world, religious strife is the norm, right? Dictatorships versus theocracies is the norm. How incredibly charmed is this part of the world that we actually share our love for liberal democracy in terms of free market democracy. We share our love for our freedom, our personal freedom. We both have Judeo-Christian traditions. I mean, seriously, we should be actually working on top of that instead of attacking.
I get what you're trying to get at in terms of the shared integration and it's especially because of NAFTA, but for other historical reasons too. This is, we kind of all grew up together.
That's right.
That being said, the issue of love for liberal democracy and how much liberal democracy there is, first of all, even in the U.S., given the role of the amount of money plays here, and in Mexico, with the assassination of candidates, certainly at municipal levels.
Of candidates?
Oh yeah, I mean, how many mayors have been killed in Mexico?
Well,
mayors, and just recently, there's a female mayor, a woman mayor.
Yeah, from Guerrero, and she was actually she was a member of my party when we were together in Congress. But I mean, remember
the state of liberal. I mean, whatever you make of the good or bad of liberal democracy,
no.
It ain't in very good shape in Mexico.
No, but we can't. No. But one thing is the issues with respect to violence in certain municipalities. We have 2,400 municipalities, And the issue of basic governance in certain states is, of course, a significant problem. But Mexico is a very large country, and parts of it are actually much safer than even Canada. The Yucatan, Campeche is safer than Canada. Mexico City, for example, is safer than similar-sized cities in the United States, like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. So just to identify the issues, we actually have perhaps the most sophisticated electoral system in the world. Each one of our elections costs between $5 and $6 billion. So we cannot, just to put it in context, I mean, we cannot throw out the efforts that we do in terms of democracy.
I'm not an expert on Mexican electoral processes, but there has been severe
there's violence
charges
and there's
and
issues
complaints
in
of fraud
certain...
and vote stealing. I want to contextualize this with, I think there was a vote stolen here in the year 2000. So, by talking about, what's wrong with liberal democracy in Mexico, I'm not in any way trying to claim how wonderful it is north of the border.
No, we've got issues. I actually contested an election. I actually overturned an election. My first election for mayor in my district in 2003, I was the first person to overturn an election. I actually charged the electoral fraud, and I proved it. Having said, so I'm the first person to understand the limitations of our electoral democracy.
I'll tell you what, before I add another piece, which is I want to talk about the role of U.S. policy, its effect on Mexico, and particularly war on drugs. But let's get back to the wall.
Yes.
Is it true that there are actually more people voluntarily leaving the United States back to Mexico than there are people trying to get in?
This is true. In the last 3 years, according to the latest research, Pew Hispanic Trust, they are telling us that basically, whereas you have to, so there are 12 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. Those are basically the figures that have most credibility. Out of that 12 million, you've got 5.3 million that are Mexicans, okay? So just because a lot of people tell me, so we're going to send back 11 million. That's no. So out of the 12 that exist, 5.3 are Mexican. 3 years ago, that number was 6.7. Okay. So in the last 3 years, there has been a net outflow of 1 million undocumented immigrants from Mexico.
And how much has to do with unprecedented levels of deportation? Under President Obama, apparently has deported more people than all other administrations put together.
That is correct. President Obama has been very, very aggressive in his deportation policies. That is certainly one of the issues. Another one of the issues is that the traditional industries, the construction industry, which is one of the industries where a lot of this labor goes to, has actually been in a slump. And of course, the fact that Mexico has actually been growing. It hasn't been growing as much as it should be, but it is growing at 3%. So there are opportunities for many of these people in Mexico. At the end of the day, we are the 13th largest economy in the world, right? $1.4 trillion. So there are opportunities.
The mass deportations and the media, which almost never even talks about the country Mexico. All you hear about is people debating whether to deport or not to deport. With President Obama in on deporting so many people, it sort of feeds into this idea, oh, what a problem we have with so many undocumented people. It's not quite at the level of Islamophobia, but it comes close to the kind of prejudice that's being built up. And of course, Trump's wall feeds in, it plays on that greatly.
None of this is new. I mean, there's a reason why the American Jewish Committee, the AJC, when the first deprecating comments were made by candidate Trump, they took out a full-page spread saying this is unacceptable because, of course, we've seen this before and we know how it ends and it's not pretty, right? And I'd like to applaud the efforts of them and many other civil organizations across the United States that have identified the significant issues that there are with this tone. And the fact that it is actually unacceptable, independent of who you're talking about, right? So, but it's not new. I mean, at the end of the day, this idea that you're unhappy and the reason you're unhappy is because of the other, and let's dehumanize the other and take that to its logical extent, which is persecution. We've seen this throughout history, and it's practically human nature. At the end of the day, I think that Americans are smart enough and perceptive enough to know that this is not true.
Now, certainly one of the things that people do sort of know about Mexico is the extent of the narco wars. The sections, I take your point, it's sections of Mexico are practically lawless.
We have 32 states, and we're talking about 4 that have these issues.
The role of the federal army has been very controversial. There's been a lot of allegations that when the army does go attack one gang, it's actually to the benefit of another gang. Like any state that has so much narco business, there's tremendous corruption arises from it. There's nothing specific. U.S. policy has a heck of a lot to do why there are narco wars in Mexico.
It has everything to do with it.
It has everything to do with it. So talk about it.
And of course,
because we're not hearing anything about
no,
that.
well,
in the
U.S.
campaign,
guns
election
and
campaign.
U.S. money is being used to finance much of this corruption that's taking place, this massive amount of violence that's taking place in very localized but certainly very worrying areas of Mexico. At the same time, Mexican drugs are being exported. When you look at the big picture, it's actually not as big as people believe in terms of the relevance to the economy and stuff like that, but it is an issue, and it is something that our governments call it co-responsibility. So we are co-responsible for this, and we need to deal with it in a way that actually works for both countries.
So what would be dealing with it?
I'm actually, my views are classically liberal in the European sense of the word. So I actually believe that drug consumption is a matter of personal responsibility. I don't think the government should play a role. I believe in decriminalization, and I think that this is something that both of our countries should do. And it's nice to see that certain American states have actually gone some way to doing it. I think we need to explore this even further. It needs to be a medical issue and not an issue of
In fact,
of
at the
criminal.
last Summit of the Americas, I believe almost all the leaders of Latin America actually had a resolution calling for an end to the war on drugs.
It was a committee made by three leaders. It was former president, chaired by former President Cedillo and former president of Colombia. If I remember, I'm not sure if it was Pastrana.
Yeah, but it's after.
No, it was after
Santos.
probably Santos.
Santos, yeah. And but failing any basic change in U.S. drug policy, these narco wars, there seems no end in sight.
I don't actually believe that. I've actually seen success stories. So a place like Juarez, for example, I was just in El Paso, which is the sister city. As you know, El Paso's sister city is Juarez. And by the way, I'd like to quote my colleague Beto O'Rourke, who's the U.S. congressman from El Paso. When we were together in D.C. and people were asking about border security, El Paso is the fourth safest city in the United States of its size. It is an incredibly safe area, safer than most of the rest of the United States. And Beto O'Rourke was very specific. He said, we are not the fourth safest city in spite of the border. We're actually the fourth safest city thanks to the border. So when people actually get to know what they're talking about in terms of the border, I find the border fascinating, and I find it one of the most dynamic places on the planet, not just in our hemisphere. So I believe that our area we need to take advantage of that. So we have this amazing place, and just to get back to this idea of the wall, so the border actually goes through the middle of a river, right? The Rio Grande. We call it the Rio Bravo.
So
you guys call it the
build
Rio
a wall
Grande.
in the river?
Yeah. Which of course you can't.
Who gets the river?
And so that I spoke to the mayor of Laredo, Texas, and he was just befuddled. I mean, he just couldn't believe it. He said, so what does that mean? Does that mean we give Mexico back the Rio Grande? Because we kind of live off the river, right?
Well, maybe that's how Trump's going to get Mexico to pay for the wall.
Yeah, we'll get the Rio Grande and you guys get a wall.
Get the wall.
I could actually, that's a negotiation
We got
I'd
a
be in
deal.
favor of.
All right, we're going to wind this up. Just let you know, the exit polls of Republican voters today in New Hampshire, 4 in 10 say undocumented immigrants should be deported. But that's very interesting. The flip side of that means 60% of Republicans are saying don't deport. It's very interesting, which means
I know
most
and
of
love
these
New
candidates
Hampshire.
are on the wrong page. Right?
These are very intelligent people. They know the strength that comes with good quality people coming in terms of immigration, in terms of everything that they bring to this country. So I know that New Hampshireites will do the right thing at
All right,
that.
thanks very much. Agustin Barrios-Gomez, federal representative from Mexico City. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We are now going to go, tell me, are we going to go to Bill Black? And I am not hearing nothing. Yes, is that a yes? Getting a yes? Okay, we're going to take a short break, just a few, like about 5 or 10 seconds, and then we're going to come back with Bill Black. We're going to talk about a certain meltdown in the stock markets. As I was saying earlier, we're in a kind of a bubble when you're covering elections. It's like there's no actual world. Everything happens within the limits of what candidates are saying. We've been trying to break out of that. But it's fascinating. In this entire New Hampshire primary, I have not heard anyone talk about the meltdown in the stock market, fears of global recession, slowdown in China. There's talk of another Lehman Brothers moment with Deutsche Bank in Germany. We're actually in a very dangerous moment right now in the global economy. It doesn't seem to have much to do with what's being talked about in the elections, but there you have it. Those are American elections. Okay, we're going to take a few seconds break and we'll be right back.